Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking, well, a necessary shortcut, really, through some source material that defines a conflict on a truly cosmic scale.
That's right.
We're looking at the fundamental nature of sin, the unyielding power of divine law, and the absolute victory that was forged in what our sources describe as history's single darkest act.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever felt that maybe discussions of sin were a bit too abstract, well, this deep dive is going to make the stakes terrifyingly concrete.
That's precisely where we need to start. We're drawing from some pretty dense theological commentary and scriptural references here. And they frame sin not just as, a series of isolated mistakes, but as a deliberate, almost military strategy of universal disorder.
A strategy.
Yeah, the sources pull no punches. They present this as a foundational war over the legitimate sovereignty of existence itself. It's the Creator's protective commandments versus hell's or Satan's agenda to systematically dismantle them.
And right from the beginning, the material makes a stunning claim, doesn't it? One we really have to unpack.
It does.
That the ultimate, the most defining atrocity of sin, the absolute furthest edge of lawlessness a creature can possibly reach, is the act of murdering the Creator God himself.
That's the trajectory.
That's the path we're tracing today.
Yeah.
How you get from, say, a minor transgression all the way to outright deicide. And crucially, the legal mechanism through which that very act, paradoxically, secured victory for the law.
Okay, let's unpack this whole idea of sin as strategy. Our sources seem really clear that this isn't just about, random badness. There's a purpose behind it.
Absolutely. The objective of this cosmic enemy, as presented, is straightforward. Dominion over space-time.
Right.
And the method for achieving that dominion is defined very clearly. Eliminate the framework that protects all created beings. That framework is the law.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how clinically the sources lay out Satan's methodology. You mentioned his aim is to trample the neighbor. Yes, that phrase comes up. It means asserting dominance, getting your way, regardless of the cost to others. And to really execute that on a cosmic scale, he needs to dismantle the entire social and spiritual constitution of the universe, which is the law, the commandments.
But why abolish it entirely? Couldn't he just, encourage people to break the rules while leaving the law technically on the books, keep things messy?
Well, he could, but think about the legal implications. That would leave him permanently guilty, always operating outside the established order. The law, as the sources define it, is the Creator's governance structure. It establishes justice, equity, and how creatures should relate to each other. It functions like a protective barrier, especially for the weak.
A shield, you said.
Exactly, a shield for the weak. If you abolish the commandments, the sources argue the inevitable outcome is that the weak creatures are just crushed. They're exploited by the strong. And that immediately creates this natural hierarchy of domination, which is precisely what Satan wants. It shifts the whole cosmos from a community governed by love and mutual respect to an empire governed by brute power. Might makes right.
So it's way beyond just a moral challenge, then. It's a fundamental legal challenge to the constitutional order of reality itself.
That's it, exactly.
Satan is essentially trying to prove the rules don't work. And if the rules don't work...
then the rule giver is invalid, flawed, incompetent.
Right.
The entire cosmic conflict, when you boil it down using these sources, is a legal dispute over the Creator's fitness to rule. Satan's goal is to prove, empirically, using Earth as the test case, that the commandments are flawed, maybe arbitrary, maybe just impossible to keep.
He wants to demonstrate failure.
If he can demonstrate that the law itself is imperfect, then the logic follows that the one who commanded them, the Creator God, the first Godhead, must also be flawed, incompetent, maybe even malicious, and therefore unfit to rule space-time.
And if the Creator is deemed unfit, legally speaking,
then there's a power vacuum. A legal vacuum opens up.
Which Satan fully intends to fill.
Precisely. He argues essentially, I can do better. My system works. A system based on self-interest, power, where strength dictates reality. The ultimate goal, laid bare in our source material, is to seize control of the cosmos.
That puts everything into perspective.
It really does. This context is absolutely critical. According to these sources, every single sin committed on Earth, from the smallest lie right up to the greatest murder, becomes, in effect, a vote in favor of abolishing the law and endorsing Satan's claim to the throne.
Okay, so if that's the high-level legal battle, let's bring it down to Earth. What does this lawlessness actually look like? The sources list some very specific atrocities that seem to characterize this philosophy of disorder on Earth, acts that really provoke the Creator's judgment.
Yeah, it's not just general badness, as you said. We have several powerful scriptural citations here detailing the actual docket of offenses.
Like Malachi.
Malachi 3.5, for instance, lists sorcerers and the adulterers and false swearers. Standard moral failures are definitely there. Murder, robbery, they always show up. But what seems to stand out most forcefully to the Creator, according to these texts, is the systemic oppression of the vulnerable, the poor.
Tell me more about that specific list of oppressions. Why is that kind of economic and social injustice so highlighted? It seems almost more central than, say, sorcery in some ways.
Because, according to the sources, it is the purest expression of that core principle, trampling the neighbor. The kinds of oppression cited include things like defrauding the wages of laborers, think about that, denying someone the pay they earned, and also the unjust pressure put upon the widow, the orphan, and the sojourner, the foreigner.
Of people with no safety net.
Exactly. These are the people who have no intrinsic power, no structural defense in society. To cheat a laborer of their wage isn't just theft, it's denying them life, potentially. To seize the land or security of a widow or orphan is basically weaponizing your strength against their absolute vulnerability.
So these aren't just incidental side effects of sin. They're the logical, almost inevitable outcome of operating under a system where self-interest trumps the law of love.
Absolutely. And the sources use Ezekiel 22, verses 6 through 9, to really expand on this picture of a lawless society. It talks about those in power, the princes in Israel, using their authority specifically to shed blood, despising parents, treating the stranger unjustly, and crucially, treating sacred things with contempt. Despising God's holy things and defiling the Sabbath. That's in Ezekiel 22.8.
So there's a link between disrespecting God and hurting people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The vertical offense, disrespecting the Creator, is directly mirrored by the horizontal cruelty toward the neighbor. The sources portray lawlessness as a two-way street. If you disrespect the Creator, it becomes much easier to justify cruelty toward your fellow creatures. One enables the other.
Okay, so if that's the picture of lawlessness, the sources then bring up Job's self-defense, particularly in Job 31, as a kind of counter-argument, a picture of what life should look like under the Creator's law.
Yes, let's spend some time there. Job's defense is incredible. He's essentially standing before the cosmic court, making his case, saying, look, I did adhere to the law of love.
He wasn't just avoiding evil.
No, he defends himself not only against things like adultery, but specifically against neglecting the poor, failing to feed the hungry, or crucially denying justice to his own servants or employees. He was actively pursuing justice and mercy, not just avoiding overt sin.
And the reason he gives for treating servants justly, that quote in Job 31.15, it's really foundational, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has something like, didn't the one who made me in the womb make them too?
Did not the same one fashion us in the womb? Yes. That is the ultimate leveling principle in the Creator system. It instantly dissolves the entire oppressive hierarchy that Satan's system depends on.
Because if the same Creator made both,
then the master has absolutely no moral, legal, or spiritual right to exploit the servant. They are fundamentally equal in origin and value. To oppress the vulnerable, in this view, is to directly insult the Creator who equally fashioned them. It shows the law of love isn't just a nice idea, it's rooted in the very reality of shared creation.
so we connect these specific sins, often economic, social, back to that fundamental principle. Sin is doing evil to one's neighbor.
And that evil is fundamentally defined by the absence of the law of love. The sources really hammer this home, reminding us that the command to love the neighbor as oneself fulfills the entire law. Romans 13 is referenced here.
And this isn't just, like, warm, fuzzy feelings.
Not at all. It's operational love. It means actively refusing to commit adultery against your neighbor, refusing to murder them, refusing to steal from them, refusing to covet what's theirs. It's the framework that guarantees safety and dignity for everyone. The law is the tangible expression of the Creator's love for the happiness and stability of his creatures.
Now, the sources mention that this whole messy, tragic experiment on Earth is being watched by the righteous angels, the heavenly host who didn't join hell's rebellion. What's their perspective on all this unfolding chaos?
That's a really powerful element in the narrative presented. These angels who were commanded to love and obey from the beginning, they witnessed Hellas' rebellion, sure, but perhaps they hadn't fully grasped the consequences of his ideology.
You mean the idea that you could abolish the law and somehow things would be better, or at least functional?
Exactly. Maybe they thought Hillel just failed in his execution, not that the idea itself was inherently catastrophic.
But now they see it playing out.
Now they are spectators to the horrific empirical outcome on Earth. They're watching a space-time where the law is systematically undermined, disregarded, and what they see isn't freedom or progress, it's the crushing of the weak by the strong, it's systemic injustice, it's utter chaos and misery.
So the theory is tested, and it fails spectacularly.
Right. This real-world evidence transforms their understanding. They finally realize the profound love, the wisdom, the sheer protective function embedded within God's commands. The chaos proves that mutual love isn't just an optional suggestion from the Creator. It's the absolute constitutional requirement for any society of creatures to sustain itself and actually be happy. This observation, the sources suggest, solidifies their resolve and cements their loyalty forever. They've seen the alternative, and it's horrifying. Hashtag COC3. The self-emptying of the second Godhead and the strategy of incarnation.
Okay, so if the law is perfect, and sin is this strategic attempt to abolish it, then the Creator had to respond, not just with overwhelming power, but with legal authority gained within the system he created.
That's the crux of it.
And this leads us to what sources describe as this extraordinary theological step taken by the second person of God, the self-emptying, the kenosis. This is where the Creator's strategy shifts radically.
The kenosis is, maybe one of the hardest concepts to really wrap your head around, because it describes this fundamental act of renunciation by an infinite being. The second Godhead, who is the very essence and expression of the Creator, made a conscious, radical choice. Philippians 2 describes it. He did not regard equality with God, his innate, unchallengeable status, as something to be sort of clung to or exploited for his own advantage.
Then he let go of it.
He emptied himself, took the form of a servant, was made in the likeness of humanity. It's a profound descent.
When the sources say emptied himself, what exactly was set aside? Was he no longer divine? Or was it about not using his divine power?
The sources are quite clear. It was the renunciation of the use of his independent divine prerogatives. He didn't stop being God in his essence, but he agreed to operate under the limitations of a creature.
So he voluntarily restricted himself.
Yes, he set aside the continuous, unmediated access to divine power, omniscience, omnipresence that he possessed inherently. He was born dependent like any human baby. He learned, he grew tired, he felt pain, and he subjected himself completely to the law he himself had given and to the Father's will.
And that was legally necessary.
Crucial. To win the cosmic legal conflict fair and square, he had to fight within the same constraints as the creatures he came to represent and save. He couldn't pull rank, so to speak.
This act of profound humility, this self-emptying, it then leads to a huge legal shift regarding the ownership of space-time, right?
Yeah.
Originally, as creator, the second Godhead was the owner.
Correct.
But by becoming a creature, he renounced that ownership status, but somehow gained the right to inherit it instead. How does that legal logic work, according to the sources?
It's rooted in the idea of the original mandate given to the first Adam. Adam was appointed as the steward, manager of Earth. When Adam failed, his inheritance, his right to manage, was corrupted and effectively usurped by Satan. So the second Godhead needed to enter the system as a flawless human steward, the last Adam, to legally reclaim the title that the first Adam had lost. He had to demonstrate perfect obedience under human conditions, subject to the same laws and pressures, to earn the right of inheritance as a creature.
Ah, so it connects to that parable of the vineyard owner's son the sources mention from Luke's gospel.
Exactly. That parable illustrates it perfectly. The owner sends his beloved son to the corrupt tenants. The usurper is managing the vineyard, hoping they'll respect him. But the key point is the son is the rightful heir.
He's not just another servant.
Right. He shifts from being the owner who could just reclaim the property by force, but that wouldn't have resolved Satan's legal challenge about the law's fairness, to becoming the heir who must physically show up and claim the title through perfect obedience and righteousness. It turns the conflict with Satan, the current illegal occupier of Earth, into a clean legal inheritance dispute, played out under the Creator's own rules for the creature domain.
And this incarnated God, this heir, becomes what the sources call the word of life, the physical embodiment of the commandments. He is the law walking around.
Yes, he is the ultimate living proof. Proof that the commandments are not only good and just, but that they're fully achievable by a creature. Even a creature subject to temptation, weakness, physical limits. By watching his life, The entire cosmos sees the law perfectly executed.
It's a live demonstration.
And more than that, the sources emphasize that the commandments are the pathway through which the Creator reveals his own character. If you want to know what the ultimate governing intelligence of the universe is like, well, look at the law he gave. And in the second Godhead, incarnate, you see that law manifested perfectly, lived out in love and obedience.
So if he is the living law, perfectly embodied, then he automatically becomes the standard, the sole criterion for judgment.
This is absolutely fundamental to the whole divine plan described. The sources make it crystal clear. Submitting to the second Godhead is, by definition, submitting to the first Godhead. Why? Because he perfectly represents the Father's will and law.
There's no daylight between them.
None. Conversely, rejecting him is explicitly rejecting the Father who sent him. There can be no higher standard raised because no creature, human or angel, can point to him and say, see, that was impossible. He lived the life we were all meant to live perfectly. He sets the bar.
The sources then bring in John's Gospel, chapter 3, explaining that the rejection of this standard, this perfect light, isn't really about intellectual misunderstanding. It's about moral preference, people loving darkness.
Yes, it's presented as a fear of exposure that drives lawlessness. John 3 says people love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. Those who practice evil hate the light. They refuse to come to it precisely because they instinctively fear that their wicked deeds will be exposed, judged, and condemned by this perfect living standard.
The light reveals the dirt.
Exactly. The entire system of lawlessness relies on secrecy, on hiding corruption, on pretending things aren't as bad as they are. The physical presence of the incarnated law forces every creature, angel and human alike, to make a conscious choice. Either embrace the light, come clean, have your deeds verified, or flee deeper into the darkness and stand condemned by your own actions.
Let's circle back then to his role as the last Adam. You mentioned he took back the delegated authority Adam lost. What did that look like in practice? How did he actively challenge Satan's current grip on the world?
As the last Adam, he wasn't just a passive example. He actively took back the delegated management authority over Earth that the first Adam forfeited through disobedience. The sources are really emphatic about this. Wherever the second Godhead went, the kingdom of God was actively being established right there, right then.
How so?
It was demonstrated physically, tangibly, casting out demons by the Spirit of God. That wasn't just a magic trick. It was reclaiming territory from the usurper, healing those oppressed by the devil, forgiving sins, unilaterally declaring people free from the legal debt that kept them bound.
So he wasn't just teaching about the kingdom, he was inaugurating it.
Precisely. He was actively reversing the effects of the fall, person by person. He was freeing people from the legal and spiritual slavery to sin, which, according to the sources, effectively enabled them to keep the commandments again, something that had become virtually impossible under Satan's crushing dominion. You see hints of this in places like the story of the sinful woman in Luke 7 or the woman caught in adultery in John 8. He frees them to obey.
So he was essentially establishing a beachhead, a zone of law and order on an otherwise occupied planet, actively dissolving Satan's control wherever he went.
That's a great way to put it, a beachhead of the kingdom. And this is exactly why Satan could not control or manipulate him. The sources stress this point repeatedly. The second Godhead's perfect, unbroken adherence to the law, even in his fragile human form, meant Satan's usual toolkit temptation, bribery, deception, intimidation, it all failed completely. He had no leverage. He found, as the gospel says, nothing in him, no hook, no point of sin to exploit.
He was untouchable by Satan's methods.
Untouchable. And this perfect life wasn't just personal holiness, it was a cosmic legal statement. It demonstrated that Satan's dominion over humanity, which was rooted in their slavery to sin, was legally dissolving wherever the last Adam walked and worked. Satan was losing his grip, legally and spiritually.
Okay, this successful campaign by the last Adam, this establishment of the kingdom's beachhead, it clearly brings things to a head. Satan realizes he's failing. He can't stop people from being liberated and following the law, and crucially, he cannot make the second Godhead himself sin. He's losing the cosmic trial. The law is being upheld.
He's cornered.
So, what calculation did he make? What led him, according to these sources, to the only desperate strategy left? Homicide. Murdering the heir.
This is the absolute turning point of the entire cosmic narrative presented in these texts. Satan sees the existential threat very clearly now. If the law is ultimately upheld and the heir successfully claims the inheritance, then Satan himself must be judged according to that law. And that means eternal condemnation.
He's facing total defeat.
Total defeat. He's losing control of the earth, which the sources constantly remind us he currently dominates. He's the spirit now at work in those who are disobedient. His primary leverage, which is sin, is disappearing wherever the second Godhead gains influence. People are being set free.
So if you can't corrupt the law, and you can't corrupt the lawkeeper,
Yeah.
then you have to eliminate the law's living embodiment, eliminate the legitimate heir to the earth.
It's brutal logic.
It is. The strategy shifts from subtle corruption and temptation to raw, brute force murder. The goal is horribly simple. Eliminate the heir, the last Adam, to seize the inheritance of the earth, the vineyard, permanently by default.
He thought killing the heir would stop everything.
That seems to be the flawed logic presented. Satan calculated, or perhaps gambled, that by killing the second Godhead, he would stop the flow of liberation, destroy the living proof that the commandments could be kept, and thereby avoid judgment himself. A dead heir, in his mind, is an heir who cannot claim the title. The problem solved. And he didn't do it himself directly. He used human instruments, people already aligned with lawlessness.
Yes, the sources are quite specific here. They reference Judas Iscariot, whom Satan entered, and they mention the lawless men referred to in Acts chapter 2, verse 23, who carried out the execution.
There's a grim irony there.
A profound irony. The murder itself was carried out by those most committed, philosophically, to abolishing the law. It was deemed the highest possible sin because it was a deliberate handing over of the Creator's perfect representative, the embodiment of the law, to be destroyed by lawlessness itself.
Which brings us to maybe the most profound and potentially confusing question the sources raise. Did Satan actually know who he was killing? Was this premeditated deicide, the intentional murder of God? Or was there some element of, I don't know, tragic ignorance involved?
This is a really debated point within the commentary tradition drawing on these sources. The texts themselves strongly suggest a level of ignorance on Satan's part, which, ironically, might protect Satan from certain legal claims by God regarding intent, but it certainly doesn't absolve him from the ultimate atrocity itself.
So what did he think he was doing?
The commentary often suggests Satan might have believed he was only a specially beloved, highly favored creature. A uniquely powerful prophet, perhaps the Messiah, the Son of God, but not Yahweh, the Creator himself, veiled in flesh.
Why would he make that mistake? He's supposed to be intelligent.
Think about the incarnation itself. It was a veil. Satan knew creatures could be an incredibly powerful look at the first Adam before the fall, or the highest angels like himself. He saw the second Godhead operating under genuine creature constraints, showing perfect obedience, yes, but also hunger, weariness, vulnerability. He likely viewed him as the Creator's most potent champion, a massive threat that had to be destroyed, but possibly not the infinite Creator himself playing by creature rules. He may have failed to grasp the sheer depth and reality of the kenosis, the self-emptying.
There's a verse in Corinthians.
Yes, 1 Corinthians 2:8 suggests that if the rulers of this age, often interpreted to include demonic powers, had truly understood who he was, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory, because, presumably, they would have recognized the ultimate victory. His death and resurrection would inevitably grant him. Killing him was, paradoxically, the key to his final triumph.
And the fact that even the disciples were confused seems to support this idea that his full divinity wasn't immediately obvious, even to those closest.
Absolutely. That's a key piece of evidence the sources point to. Even his inner circle failed to grasp the full extent of his divine nature before the resurrection.
They saw him as
a mighty prophet, certainly, as the promised Messiah, the Son of God. But those titles, in their first-century Jewish cultural context, often implied a highly exalted creature, an agent of God, maybe even superhuman, but not necessarily the eternal Lord God, Yahweh, who spoke the universe into being. That final penny hadn't dropped for most of them.
which perfectly explains their reaction after the crucifixion. That crushing despair Luke describes on the road to Emmaus.
Exactly. Luke 24:17 shows them utterly devastated. They weren't mourning the temporary setback of a deity they expected to bounce back. They were mourning the definitive death of their great hope. A man, a prophet, their leader, who had been unjustly, brutally killed. They thought the entire movement, everything they'd invested their lives in, had simply ended, failed.
It was final for them.
They believed their deliverer had suffered the ultimate defeat, a final, unrecoverable failure. Had they truly understood he was the eternal creator incarnate, their reaction would surely have been different. Perhaps awe, terror, confusion, maybe even expectation, but certainly not that utter, paralyzing, it's all over hopelessness. They thought the physical death was the end of the story.
But there was one group who did know. The righteous angels. heavenly host who hadn't rebelled.
Yes, here the sources are clear. The angels knew he was the creator God. Why? Because they were explicitly commanded to worship him, according to Hebrews 1:6. You don't worship a mere creature, however exalted.
So they watched the whole thing unfold knowing exactly who he was.
They watched the betrayal, the mockery, the torture, the murder with full, agonizing knowledge of the victim's true identity. Their horror must have been absolute, watching the very being they worshipped, the one who fashioned them from nothing, being destroyed by a subordinate creature, Satan, who had chosen the path of lawlessness.
So regardless of Satan's precise cognitive state, whether he knew fully or just suspected or was partially blind,
The ultimate act of lawlessness was committed. He instigated the murder of the only sinless being who had ever lived, the one who perfectly upheld the law he himself had given. He orchestrated the killing of the very being who provided his own existence.
that's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. The sources conclude that no greater transgression by a creature against the Creator can even be conceived than killing the author of life himself. This act, the crucifixion, permanently exposed the absolute final depravity and the inherently self-destructive nature of sin to the entire cosmos. It provided the final, undeniable evidence that lawlessness, when allowed to run its full course, when fully matured, leads directly, inevitably, to the murder of the innocent, even, ultimately, the murder of God himself.
So the moment of execution, the crucifixion, that was meant to be Satan's checkmate, his ultimate victory, the eradication of the legal threat posed by the heir, the final abolition of the living law.
That was the plan.
But the sources reveal this profound, stunning paradox. This ultimate act of lawlessness became the very foundation for the ultimate eternal victory of the law.
Exactly. Satan's strategy failed spectacularly, fundamentally because he misunderstood the true nature of the being he killed, and perhaps even more fundamentally, he misunderstood the legal mechanism of death itself.
How so?
By committing the ultimate act of lawlessness, murdering the one and only sinless one, Satan inadvertently provided the final, conclusive, irrefutable proof against his own regime in the cosmic court.
He basically signed his own condemnation warrant.
He absolutely did. He broke every conceivable law in the universe to secure his inheritance, but in doing so, he rendered his own claim utterly and permanently illegal. Furthermore, the sources heavily imply that Satan didn't actually believe in the resurrection. He fully expected the second Godhead to remain in the grave. Just like all the righteous prophets and servants of God, he had helped extinguish throughout history. Death had always won before.
I mean, from his perspective, historically, death had never been defeated by a human being. Why should he expect this particular human, however special, to be any different?
He was likely blinded by his own arrogance, maybe, and his focus on the victim's apparent human vulnerability. He completely overlooked, or perhaps refused to believe, the foundational legal principle involved. Death is the wages of sin. That's Romans 6.23.
It's a legal transaction.
It's a legal transaction. Sin earns death. Death is the necessary, just consequence of violating the Creator's law.
And the second Godhead
Yeah,
had committed no sin. Zero.
precisely. The sources are extremely emphatic on this point. Since he committed no sin whatsoever, death had absolutely no legal claim on him. The grip of death, which is tied inexorably, legally, to lawlessness and guilt, could not hold the sinless one captive.
So the resurrection wasn't just a miracle.
It was more than that. Acts 2, verse 24 is often cited here. God raised him up, losing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. It wasn't possible. The sources present the resurrection not simply as a display of divine power overcoming death, but as a legal inevitability. The prerequisite for permanent death, personal guilt under the law, was completely absent. Death, in effect, tried to claim wages from someone who had never done the work of sin, and the payment was legally, necessarily, refused. Death's claim was invalid.
Wow, okay, so the resurrection becomes the formal confirmation then. The final cosmic court ruling that establishes the second Godhead's inheritance once and for all.
It is precisely that. It's the moment the legal title deed to all of space-time is formally transferred, validated, and confirmed in his name. The sources state it unequivocally. He now holds all authority in heaven and on earth. Matthew 28.18.
Undisputed authority.
Absolute, undisputed, and permanently settled. Settled by his sinless life, his sacrificial death which satisfied justice, and his ultimate victory over lawlessness demonstrated by the resurrection.
And with this confirmation of absolute authority, the sources say, he receives a new identity, or a name that defines the Creator's relationship with creation in this new era.
Yes, he receives the name that is above every name, as Philippians 2 puts it, and the sources clarify this name, Jesus, which literally means Yahweh is salvation.
So the name itself is a declaration.
It's a declaration and the official title, you could say. It's the way the Creator now reveals himself to all creatures in this new era of completed authority. It signifies that the solution to lawlessness, the guarantee of ultimate justice, and the promise of eternal life are all now contained and embodied within the person of the resurrected heir, Jesus. The cosmic conflict has resolved. The ultimate authority is now wielded by the ultimate demonstration of law-keeping love and sacrificial redemption.
And his authority isn't just over the living or over governments. It extends even further.
It extends to the ultimate powers of disorder themselves. He now holds the keys to death and Hades. That's from Revelation chapter 1.
The keys, meaning he controls access, he's the gatekeeper.
Exactly. It means the two final domains of chaos, destruction, separation, and non-existence are now under his direct, sovereign command. Satan, who previously wielded the power of death through sin, is utterly disarmed in that respect. His ultimate weapon is taken from him. His kingdom is fundamentally overthrown, and he himself is now subject to the judgment of the resurrected heir, who proved the law is both perfectly good and ultimately victorious.
Which brings us back to that stunning irony the sources describe.
Yeah.
Redemption achieved through lawlessness.
It is the ultimate paradox of divine wisdom and justice. Satan intended the crucifixion to be the pinnacle of evil, the final destruction of the law and its embodiment, the ultimate act of lawlessness. Yet the Creator, in his sovereignty, utilized that very act committed by lawless hands spurred on by Satan as the precise means of atonement. It became the sacrifice required by his own perfect justice to redeem all those creatures, human and perhaps beyond, who repent and turn back to the law through faith in the heir.
The ultimate evil becomes the ultimate good.
The sinless victim became the final, sufficient payment for sin, opening a pathway for lawless creatures to be forgiven, reconciled, and restored to a relationship of loving obedience with their Creator. God took the very weapon Satan forged for the destruction of the cosmos and transformed it into the very instrument of its salvation. It's an astonishing turnaround. #Chagshem6, conclusion and provocative thought.
Wow. This has been an incredibly deep dive, really unpacking the theological and legal architecture behind this grand narrative of sin and redemption. Let's just quickly recap the critical milestones we've covered based on these sources.
Sure. We started by defining sin not just as rule-breaking, but as a systematic, strategic attempt by Satan to abolish the Creator's protective law. The inevitable result being the oppression of the weak, that trampling of the neighbor. The whole conflict was framed as a legal dispute over the Creator's fitness to rule.
Right, and the Creator's response wasn't just force, but this radical strategy of kenosis, the self-emptying and incarnation of the second Godhead.
Yeah.
He became the last Adam.
He became the living, walking, breathing proof that the law is good, just, and actually achievable by a creature operating under creature limitations. And in doing so, he legally transitioned his status from original owner to rightful heir, ready to reclaim the inheritance lost by the first Adam.
Then came Satan's desperate final move, instigating the murder of the heir, which failed completely.
Utterly failed. Instead of eliminating the threat and abolishing the law, his ultimate act of lawlessness served only to reveal the full, self-destructive horror of sin to the entire universe. It proved definitively why lawlessness must be judged and eradicated.
And the victim, being sinless, couldn't be held by death.
Exactly. His inevitable resurrection sealed the deal. It confirmed the second Godhead's ultimate, eternal authority over all space-time, including the powers of death itself. Victory for the law, embodied in the heir.
So this entire cosmic trial, really stretching from hell's initial rebellion in heaven through all of Earth's painful history, culminating in the resurrection, provided this undeniable historical demonstration, a complete object lesson for every creature in existence forever, showing the true consequences of lawlessness versus faithfulness to the law of love.
A completed demonstration.
And that brings us right to our final provocative thought, something for you, our listeners, to really chew on.
Our sources mention this very nuanced detail about the angels, that their free will, while vast and real, was, up until this point in cosmic history, still technically incomplete. Incomplete because they still possess the genuine, actual possibility of choosing sin, of falling like Hillel did.
Because Hillel proved it was possible, even if his reasons were flawed.
Right. Free will, by definition, seemed to contain the possibility of falling. But that possibility was perhaps based on an abstract, untested proposition. Hillel's claim that chaos and self-interest could somehow be superior to God's order and love. It hadn't been fully played out to its ultimate conclusion.
But now, they have witnessed the entire drama. start to finish. They saw Hillel's ideology ripen into the actual murder of the Creator incarnate. And then they saw the inevitable, unstoppable triumph of the law and the heir in the resurrection. They have now seen the absolute final fruit of choosing disorder.
So the question is this. If the faithful angels watched this completed, historical, undeniable demonstration, witnessing the absolute extremity of evil and seeing its total inability to ultimately defeat the righteous law of God, how might this comprehensive experiential knowledge finally affect the completion of their free will?
Could seeing the end result so definitively
Yeah.
change the nature of their choice?
Could that ultimate knowledge, that perfect understanding of where lawlessness inevitably leads, actually remove the real possibility of them ever choosing that path again? It raises a fascinating question. Is true, completed, eternally stable free will only achieved when the consequences of every possible fundamental choice are fully, historically, and irrevocably understood?
That is definitely a profound thought to sit with.